I think you're live.
Hey!
Hello and welcome, since Randy's not here to say it, and that's how we have to start off every edition of the Vintage Super League. I'm joined here with Chris Bakula. I'm Rich Shea, or at least I've been lied to. So how are you doing tonight, Chris?
I'm all right. How are you doing? You're coming off a very strong vintage performance this week.
Well, Dromoka and I had a good time at the tournament.
Yeah, so talk to me about this Dromoka thing. So your deck has a lot of gushes in it.
Yeah.
Dromoka costs 6.
So at the Vintage Online 93-player tournament, I played a deck, and it was a green, white, and blue deck that's banned, and it had Monastery Mentor and Sylvan Library and Vintage All-Star Dragonlord Dromoka. So Dromoka is in the deck because she does one thing incredibly well, and that is single-handedly beats Gush decks, single-handedly beats Delver strategies, single-handedly beats a lot of strategies that rely on reducing the opponent's life total to 0.
But you can't really gush if you want to cast it, right?
There's a certain amount of dyssynergy, but I'm an optimist, and I have a Mana and a Black Lotus. So,
you do have a Black Lotus. I'll give you credit for that.
She doesn't arrive early. She's sort of a finisher card. She arrives fairly late, but when she does arrive, she turns the tide of battle. I was playing one round where my opponent had Monastery Mentor, and Mentor made a bunch of his elemental friends, and they all arrived. And
oh, I think they're monks.
What's that?
They're monks.
Right, okay. Alright, so, whatever they were, Dromoka didn't care. She arrived and gained me enough life so that I could just win in the air over my opponent.
Oh yeah, once it's in play, it's obviously...
Yeah, and I do realize that there's some synergy, but if you look at the mana base, it's actually a fairly robust mana base. It has 16 land, a full set of Moxen, of course, Black Lotus, and remember, you can go right from 5 to 6 via Gush.
Did you have Stony Silence in your deck too?
Yes, 2. 2 of them.
that was enough. I also thought that was pretty unusual with the...
It was a called shot for the metagame. So I expected there to be a lot of people trying to use Seed of the Synod, and those decks can be very fast, and Cesar Fernandez knocked me out of the top 8 in the last one of these. And so I was especially weary of decks that were trying to use Time Vault and Voltaic Key, and it's a classic strategy using Null Rod. But this is a Null Rod that's not vulnerable to the sort of removal people use Null Rods for.
Yeah, sure. It's just another kind of card that makes it hard to cast Dromoka, that's all.
Yeah, a lot of things conspire against Dromoka. It's not easy being a 6-drop dragon in Vintage, but Brian Kelly won the Vintage Championship with her. And, no, granted, he had oath to put her into play at a more reasonable cost. But she's actually just good to hardcast, and she gets boarded out against decks with Dark Ritual, and she gets boarded out against decks that are trying to use Time Vault. But
yeah,
against decks that are trying to play Fair Magic, she's actually good. And being uncounterable makes her a virtual, I'd say, 4.5 drop.
All right. And, of course, we should say that you lost in the finals, which is a great performance, but obviously, but you lost in the finals to fellow VSL competitor Eric Froelich.
I did, and I lost in spectacular fashion. It wasn't very close. It was, well, game 1, he got out an early Yawgmoth's bargain, drew a whole bunch of cards, and while Dromoka might drain for 5 a turn, Tendrils can drain for at least 20 a turn.
What would you rather have in play? Which 6-mana permanent? Dromoka or Yawgmoth's bargain?
I would rather have Yawgmoth's bargain in play. I'll be honest with you. I would rather have Yawgmoth's bargain in play.
And of course, Randy also made top 8 of the tournament, right?
He did. Yes, it was a
VSL competitors were 3 for 3. I don't think anyone played and didn't make it, did they?
I think everyone in the VSL made it. I think it was 3 out of the top 4 for VSL players.
All right. So speaking of VSL, I guess we should talk about tonight. So we got a lot of matches on the docket. Most of them are elimination matches. So most of them, someone is fighting for their life.
That's true. We're playing with double elimination, so whenever someone gets 2 losses, that person's eliminated. And this is our second of 3 weeks of elimination rounds. And
we're going to have Roland versus Gerard. Roland Chang versus Gerard Fabiano in the first match, I believe. And the only people playing tonight who can't be eliminated are, I think it's Reed Duke and I'm blanking now. Who is it? Reed and I gotta look.
All right.
We don't have the bracket currently. We've got some.
We have a few technical issues.
It might be. Is it Nick Detweiler? Maybe it's.
I don't think Nick's playing tonight. Nick Detweiler is 2-0. He's won both of his matches so far.
Oh, so Nick's still in this. So
I thought that the first round was going to be Gerard Fabiano against David Ochoa.
Oh yeah, we have the wrong names up here. You're right. We're having some slight tech issues tonight.
We've had a few technical snags, but bear with us. Bear with us.
So that's correct. It is Gerard versus.
So how do you like this matchup, Chris?
Well, so Gerard's deck obviously is.
Gerard's deck is awesome.
Is unusual.
I don't know if it's good, but it's awesome.
So the fact that Gerard's decks are always, you kind of look at them and you don't really know what's a good matchup or a bad matchup because he has a lot of strange cards that could be swingy. He's playing against David Ochoa, who's playing Shops.
Right. So Dave Ochoa has, let's see, what do we have? He has Arcbound Ravager, Hangerback Walker. That's a lot like what I played at Vintage Champs. But he also has 3 Metalworkers and an Umezawa's Jide. Right. So that's interesting.
So Gerard's deck, as far as I don't know whether you want to analyze it in terms of whether it's anti-shops or not.
Well, I bet if he gets that Mindslaver, and then he draws an Arcbound Ravager, he's going to have an enjoyable time playing that turn.
That is true. That will be a good turn. Anytime he has the Ravager on the other side of the battlefield versus his Mindslaver.
So we were talking about 6-drops earlier, and looking at Gerard's list, he has Consecrated Sphinx, Wormcoil Engine, Tassagir the Golden Fang, and of course, the best 6-drop ever, Mindslaver.
Well, Tassagir's not really even less of a 6-drop than your unconquerable Dragonlord Dromoka.
I guess that's true.
But yeah, Gerard's deck is mostly a control deck. Obviously, it has 3 mana drains, 4 Force of Will. It has Tinker, Time Walk, Toxic Deluge, Treasure. I'm just looking at his one-ofs.
So if you had an Ashiok,
it has a Time Vault. So
Ashiok the Nightmare Weaver, when would you bring him or her in?
So I would never bring in Ashiok the Nightmare Weaver. But Gerard plays Ashiok in every format. So it's not that surprising to see him play it here.
That makes sense.
He brought it in against Storm last week, although I kind of feel like
both their win conditions. I
sort of felt like he brought it in last week because he just couldn't bring himself to beat Reed Duke. Like Reed's just too good of a guy. So Gerard was like, well, if I could play Ashiok and lose to Reed, that's like win-win. So I kind of think that's what happened last week.
Just deliberately handicapping himself by bringing in the Nightmare Weaver?
I mean, he gets to play his signature card, and he gets to, give Reed Duke a win. I mean, that's feeling good.
Just a win for everyone?
He has all his deck fade in his deck, which I don't know if we mentioned that already. So he does have weapons against this Shops deck, especially after boarding because he's playing red. So this is kind of a weird control deck. And of course, the new Shops decks look quite a bit different than the VSL Shops decks we're used to from last season, where people like me would play, decks that are designed for no one to ever cast a spell ever and just attack.
I think you raised a great point, Chris. I think my opinion is that once Chalice of the Void got restricted, I think that Workshops remained tier 1, but I think that they shifted more into more of an aggressive posture.
Now, why don't you think that you can just replace Chalice with Null Rod, for example?
I think one of the really powerful things that you could do with workshop decks that you can't do anymore is be able to play 2 lock pieces on the first turn. And you can still do that, but that's much harder now.
That's a good point. I also think the fact that you can't, like I know when Reed was building his Storm deck, he was like, oh yeah, I don't need these. What's the 3 casting cost Hercules recall?
Rebuild?
Yeah, rebuild. Is that what it's called? Yeah, like people don't. People just play 4 Hercules recalls now, not worry about Chalice on 2 coming down.
Absolutely. If you look at my suite of workshop hate, I'm on Triplex Nature's Claims.
Right. Yeah, that's a big difference. Like I think people who hadn't played the format somewhat underestimated how much, like the second Chalice coming down. Like the first one might be for 0, but the second one being on 1 can be brutal.
Yes.
And then after boarding and you have your opponent's deck list in VSL most of the time, then you really know what to do with it after boarding.
Absolutely. And I think the real loser here really is Ingot Chewer. Ingot Chewer used to be an all-star because he was a 1-mana, essentially an artifact removal spell, who wasn't actually stricken with a converted mana cost of 1. And that was a huge boon because one of the ways that you'd lose to workshops is by getting all of your removal spells locked out. And that's no longer the case. So now you see people playing with a lot more 1-mana artifact removal.
Yeah. And Ingot Chewer being so great in Vintage was kind of cool. Like I love the corner cards in Vintage that don't get played much in other formats. I mean, as far as I know, Ingot Chewer is only played in Living End, in Modern, and in Vintage, and it's not played in Legacy at all, which is also kind of cool that the card skips.
That's true. That's true. Someday, old man Chewer's going to be telling his, grandchildren about the time that he was hanging out with Black Lotus and Mishra.
So I'm not sure how far we are from the match. Maybe our producer in the background can whisper that to me.
Gonna go without hand cams. Should only be another minute or 2.
All right.
Sounds like we're not going to have hand cams, which is unfortunate because I really like to dig deep into the mind of Gerard Fabiano and try to play along with what's Gerard thinking.
Oh.
One important thing with Gerard is you don't need to see his hand for mulligan decisions. I think we will likely have hand cams later. Things have just sounds like there's some possibly internet problems in the American West because a few other people were having trouble streaming tonight, it sounds like, and people are saying it's not Twitch, but I don't know. Anyway, we'll get there. But
yeah, we'll figure it out. It's fine. It's more suspenseful this way without hand cams. At first, when the league started, I wasn't sold on hand cams. Now, I think they've been a net positive, but I certainly don't mind not having them because it's more exciting this way.
Oh, it's exciting, but it's just I love the hand cams. And obviously, the technical glitches that have occasionally come along with them have not been the best, but they make it definitely a richer analysis experience.
They do make it a mere analysis experience. So
I don't know. I mean, obviously in this match, it's easy. It's easy to pick shops versus anything that you imagine to be like an untuned Vintage deck, right? But Gerard has all the fast mana and a lot of problem cards, so I don't know.
Yeah. It's true. It really seems like Gerard's deck can do some awesome, powerful things. But I think it's going to favor Ochoa just because I think his list is a bit more established, tuned. But I certainly would not mind being wrong about that because Gerard's deck does look pretty awesome.
So is Gerard the only person playing Tinker?
Is it not in any of the Storm builds that people are playing?
I don't know. I'm missing a couple of the deck lists.
Wait.
I don't believe Reed has it.
No, there's only a single copy of Tinker. Wow.
I think the interesting thing is like, obviously, if you had told me, whatever, I played a lot of Vintage, like, I guess, 2009, 2010, 2011 is when I was playing a lot of Vintage. If you had told me then that we were going to do VSL 5 years later and nobody would ever play Tinker, I would have been shocked.
Yeah, I hadn't predicted that equipment would outnumber Tinker.
And now even though we have a Tinker, we still don't have a robot. There's no
No.
processing.
There's just Mindslaver and Wormcoil Engine.
Yeah, I guess Wormcoil Engine, but that's pretty lackluster to tinker for, except against Delver decks, obviously. The fact that Delver decks have taken over as the aggro decks.
It does an okay robotic Dromoka impression.
Right.
But I think depending on the board state,
right?
you might just want to get Mindslaver here. I mean,
All right,
that's
so it looks
usually